Good morning. My name is Rich Sloma. Welcome to today's New York State Archives presentation of Ask Us Anything about digital imaging. Today's presenters are Sarah Durling, Michael Martin, and Jamie Brinkman. Sarah is head of New York State Archives Local Government Records Services. Michael is Records Advisory Officer for Towns, and Jamie is supervisor in our Researcher Services Unit. This session is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box to the right side of your screen. And of course, we will be taking questions during this presentation as a result of the topic here of Ask Us Anything. And we will take those questions and we'll take additional questions as well. And now I will turn the presentation over to Sarah.
Thanks so much, Rich. So hi, everybody. Thank you for coming today. Today's session is Ask Us Anything About Imaging, and this is a session where you guys are really in charge of what we talk about today. The focus is on imaging, and we have our lovely panelists, Jamie and Michael, who are experts in the field, who are happy to answer whatever questions you have. The way this works is you'll throw questions in the chat. We do have some pre-prepared to kind of get us started, but you'll throw questions in the chat. We'll pick them up and answer them. One thing we do want to point out, though, is that we aren't going to be addressing records retention specific to individual record series or situations that you're in. Generally speaking, that ends up not being as useful for everyone attending this session. So if you have questions about records retention, please reach out to your state agency or local government records advisory officer here at the archives so that we can make sure that those questions get answered for you. So moving on, our first question. Hey, Michael, why don't you take this one? What's the difference between scanning, imaging, and digitization?
So basically, there is no difference. It's just really a question of semantics. Um, they're basically all closely related. They're used interchangeably for the most part when describing the conversion of paper records to electronic format. But there are, some subtle differences. For example, imaging could describe converting paper records to microfilm. So it's not exclusively used for electronic records. Digitization could be used when converting films to negatives or electronic images. So it refers, explicitly to a process for converting records to electronic format, but is much more agnostic about the original record format. But for our intents and purposes, when you're talking about turning paper records into electronic ones, you can generally use whichever one you feel comfortable with.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Michael. I know that's a question that comes up a lot. Jamie, why don't you take on this one? Does the archives have any instructions for how I should scan my records?
Yeah, I'm going to do my best Minnesotan accent, so apologies out there, but you betcha. Um, we do indeed have guidelines and instructions. They're called the Digital Imaging Guidelines. They're available on our website. I'm sure we'll provide a link for you in the chat. The guidelines specify everything from the format, the resolution, storage, and any quality control requirements for your scanning or imaging or digitization projects. On our next slide, we'll have some information about what's in those guidelines and kind of what to expect regarding requirements. I should note that governments are not legally allowed to destroy their original paper records after scanning them if they did not do so in line with the digital imaging guidelines. So just be aware of that. So please contact this local government records advisory services or your state agency scheduling services for more information on what you should be doing with those records.
Awesome. I have thrown the digital imaging guidelines in the chat, and actually we have a second publication on image verification that I am throwing in right now as well, so that folks can go and pull those links as they need them.
Yeah, and these are probably the most popular formats, resolutions, storage, information that people would be using for their projects, like TIFF and PDFAs for records that have a 10-year plus retention. We typically advise that just because they're they do a better job of not losing information and retaining certain aspects of like say PDFs, retaining like fonts and font sizes and colors and logos and things like that. That's why we typically advise PDFA for those long retention periods. And 300 PPI is usually standard for resolution, things like that. But you can find all that fun stuff in our guidelines, or talk to your RAOs or state agency advisors.
Yeah, it's really important for folks to be aware of these if they're looking, particularly if they're a local government looking to apply for one of our LGRMF grants, Local Government Records Management Improvement Fund grants, because you absolutely have to follow these guidelines if you intend to digitize records through our program. All right. Looking at the chat, it's still pretty quiet, guys. Please feel free to throw questions in there. If you're having trouble finding where it is on your screen, in the bottom right-hand corner, there's kind of like a little word balloon. If you hit that button, it'll open it right up for you. So the next question is, do scanned records follow the same retention schedules as the paper ones? Michael, what are your thoughts on this?
The answer is yes. I mean, instances where the scanned copy is the official copy, the records must be kept for the duration of the retention period. So if you are scanning records that have a permanent retention, you have to make sure that you're scanning at a high enough quality and everything else that it's going to ensure long-term long-term preservation. For access copies, that are not the official copy and may be considered a duplicate, then the retention can obviously be much less. But they follow the retention schedules depending on whether it's electronic or paper, just like email and paper correspondence, it's all the same. They follow the same retention period.
Good deal. Oh, we have some questions. So Kathy asked, how do we access the equipment for scanning records, and is there a cloud service we can store them on with the state, or do we need to find a storage space for them? And I'm not clear if Kathy's with a state agency or a local government. So who wants to take this one?
I'm happy to answer. Could you please repeat the first part?
Sure.
I got the storage part, but I wasn't sure about the first.
No worries. How do we access the equipment for scanning records, and is there a cloud service we can store them on with the state, or do we need to find a storage space for them?
So there's no official storage space, like cloud space for the state. We do not have the ability to provide that at this time. When it comes to accessing scanning equipment, you can always contact, you can look at the imaging guidelines and make sure that whatever equipment that you're going to purchase meets those guidelines in terms of resolution, format, and such. The state archives doesn't make recommendations for any particular scanners or equipment or software, um, but we can provide you with information about what is necessary to ensure that you're creating high quality digital images. So what we recommend is probably reach out to other organizations or other either local governments or state agencies who have been through a large project like this, and they may help provide you with some information about their experiences as well.
All right, and Kathy followed up with that she is with a local government. All right, Michael, I think this one might be for you too. Who would you contact about applying for a grant, and what is that process?
Sure. So you would best way to start would be to contact your records advisory officer, which we're broken up by the type of local government. So you can contact any one of us, and we'll be able to help you or direct you to who you need to speak to, because the whole process of starting a grant is making sure that you have an understanding of what your records are and what needs to be done. And sometimes people want to dive right into scanning things, but maybe there are other issues that need to be addressed first. That's why it's always nice to talk to your records advisory officer to find out where you are, in your overall records management program or maybe plan, and see if scanning the records makes sense. They're also the ones who can help you with the details about, how you need to apply for an e-grants account or something else that can help you with the process as well.
And I want to note, unfortunately, these grants are restricted to local governments, state agencies. My apologies, but they're not available to you. I threw in the chat the link to the local government records management improvement program pages so you can take a look at the grant program, and a link to the local government advisory services. I'm also going to, just in the name of Faraday, throw in a link for the state agency services too. But again, they're not going to be as helpful on the grants front. All right. Let's see. Next question we have in the chat is, can we outsource the 100% image verification to the scanning vendor?
I can take this one.
Sure.
No, unfortunately, you can't. In the digital imaging guidelines, we have a section about quality control, and you'll see in there that it does note that the quality control has to be performed by the local government or state agency that is having these items scanned. So it's a requirement for you to receive the records back, do that verification on your own, and then if you are choosing to dispose of the paper records because you are going to make the electronic records your official copy, then you can safely dispose of them as long as they, aren't before 1910, and a few other caveats that are listed on our website as well.
Thanks, Jamie.
Oh, and I do want to add that is something for the grants for local governments. Addressing your quality control plan and making sure you have time to do that image verification in your timeline is very important.
Absolutely.
One other thing I'd like to add is, uh, no, not only can the vendor not do the verification for you, but when they cannot hold on to your paper records and you be able to do the verification yourself. So you can't have them hold on to the records. They have to send you back the original paper records as part of that verification process.
Awesome. Thank you. Can you tell we've been dealing with these for a while, huh? All right. Right now we have one last question in the chat, and actually I'll take this one because I'm still covering them. Are school districts eligible for grants? Yes, if you are a New York State local government in your school district, you are eligible for the grant program. Unfortunately, private schools, parochial schools, and charter schools are not eligible for the grant program, however. All right, keep those questions coming, folks. All right. See, next question we have on our slides are, we scanned a bunch of our records a while back and put them on CDs. Is this a good way to store them? I'm not sure what format they're in or if they went through any QC. Who wants to take this one?
I could take this one.
Awesome.
So you may have noticed on that requirements page that we at the State Archives recommend server-based storage for your electronic records, scanned or not, whether they're scanned or they were created electronically. Uh, so CDs and other removable media like thumb drives have limitations that are associated with their lifespan, and it's a lot shorter than you probably think. So the potential to be lost or misplaced also does not make them good long-term storage solutions. So we would recommend moving those records into a local area network, or you could do a content management system if you have that, or even if you don't have those, some other network storage environment, somewhere that is not the CDs, essentially. So it's important to take a look at the files on the CDs if it's readable, and You might need to work with your IT staff to see what type of information they contain. If anyone's tried to open a floppy disk recently, it's not a fun experience. Um, but you want to make sure you can access that information, and from there you can make decisions on how to handle them going forward. I wouldn't recommend trusting that they went through QC without being able to identify or to verify it through some sort of documentation or discussion with staff who might have been involved with the project and would know whether or not they were QC'd. If you still have the original paper records and you want to dispose of them, you will definitely need to ensure that the electronic records match up with the digital imaging guideline requirements, and then QC the records if it wasn't done and you can't verify that it was.
Yeah, this is one of those things where we really strongly recommend that if folks think they're going to be disposing of the records at some point in the future, they make sure they build that QC into the project, even if their intent isn't to dispose of them right now. Because when you win that lottery and you move to Aruba, the people who follow behind you might not necessarily know that, if QC happens. So also document that in your paperwork and in your policies as well. All right, let's see what we got for our next question. What's the best kind of scanner to use on our records?
I can take this one.
Sure.
Uh, so about that, it really comes down to the idea that we don't make recommendations, as I said, on specific hardware, software, vendors, or services. We can discuss the different attributes that you're going to want to look at based on your project. For example, if you're scanning a bunch of, typical office records, you can probably use a sheet fed scanner. That's a kind where, you load up a whole bunch of pages and it feeds in. If you're talking about some handwritten journals or books, then you're going to want to talk about maybe having a overhead or flatbed scanner with a book cradle, something like that. Maybe even a planetary scanner. If you're talking about huge maps and plans, you want to have a scanner that can work with those. Um, we can definitely give you ideas of different types of scanners, but not necessarily recommendations on specific ones themselves.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Let's see. Chat's still pretty quiet right now. So again, folks, please feel free to send in your questions as you have them. We'll be happy to answer them for you. The next question is, can you scan microfilm? We have a lot of it. What do you think?
I can take this one. Yes, you totally can scan microfilm and microfiche if you still have those. We know it's getting harder and harder to find and repair a microfilm reader. So if you scan them, image them, it can be a really great way to improve the access. You know, you may scan them with the intent to use the electronic copy as the official copy, or, you could always just keep the microfilm as the preservation copy or the official copy, because that's a really good physical backup, because there are no issues with the medium itself. It's fairly stable in microfilm, it's eye readable, so it's good. We can trust it as a long-term preservation. But you can scan them to make them more accessible, or you can make it the official copy if that's what you wish to do. Perfectly fine.
I bet there's a lot of folks out there who've got stories of having to jump over to the library on the other side of town, if not a couple of towns over, to actually use a microfilm reader to access their microfilm.
Or not even familiar with what a microfiche card is.
I know, they're getting thin on the ground and not a lot of folks use them anymore. Let's see, next question. So my office has a lot of contracts with signatures on them. Can we scan those? Is that legal?
I could take this one.
Cool.
The good news is yes, you can. So, New York State has the Electronic Records Signatures Act. Some of you probably have heard your RAO mention this before to you. It's also known as ESRA. Um, it supports the use of electronic signatures in place of wet ones wet ink ones in most cases. We do recommend that you consult your counsel first before making the jump. That'll ensure that it's appropriate for the records you have.
Good deal. I know that there are still a lot of places that require their wet signatures for things, but in a lot of cases, you really can move over to the electronic version. So once you have scanned records, how do you organize them? Do you do it yourself? Do you use a vendor index? Do you use an ECM? Michael, do you have thoughts on this?
Of course. Okay, so you spent all this time and money to scan your records. You want to make sure that you can find them once you're done, right? So you can organize them by setting up a file plan yourself, storing them on something like your local area network, or you could send them out to a vendor and have them index it for you. If they're going to index it for you, you want to sit down and make sure that they are familiar with all the different ways that you wish to access the record. So make sure that there's plenty of fields for indexing, ways for you to get to those records. If you're going to do it yourself, it's best to sit down, kind of form some kind of team so people know how people currently access the records. You want it to mirror whatever paper system that you currently have that people are comfortable with. And then you want to develop some naming conventions for the different kind of file types. And then once those standards are set, you make sure people are familiar with them, because having 000, image number 0001 is not as helpful as it needs to be. So people have naming conventions, can quickly identify things and then retrieve them. Another way is this big honking, electronic content management system. It's a large repository. It manages all your digital files, provides one standard user interface, kind of gives structure to your data, and they always have some kind of digital imaging component. That's another way as well. But the thing we want to make sure people understand is it's great to scan all of these records, but you want to make sure that you can organize them, find them, and whatever system you're using, whether you're doing it yourself or you're using a content management system, whatever that system is, that you are able to remove those records and move them to something else when that is necessary.
Cool. Can I ask you what you think would make for good file name conventions?
So good file name conventions would be something that describes the record probably by the department or its function, and is also tied to if not the retention schedule item, then there's a way to quickly identify what the retention of the record might be so that they can be pulled together. And then when that time period is reached, they can then be removed.
Oh, okay. So like for the training team at the archives, I might want to have a file name that says something like archives, training team, minutes, and then the date of the minutes?
That would be sufficient, yes.
Okay.
And you want to make sure that you standardize whatever you have for the date, for example, because
Mm.
some people use the 0101 2024, and other people use 2024 0101. So you want to make sure that whatever you've chosen is standardized across your organization.
I vote for year first.
I vote for year first as well. It's much easier to organize. It's much easier to keep things together.
Oh, for sure. I also would suggest like paying attention to your folder structure too, whether it's on your local network or in like a content management system, because that'll help, if you go and retire in Aruba, like Sarah says, people are still going to be able to need to find those records. And having a set path, if you say follow the headings and the functions and subheadings in the LGS retention schedule or the state agency general schedule, then it's a lot easier for people to find the path and dig down to figure out where the file is that they need. I think we did a webinar on that recently.
Yeah. Oh, we have some folks who are very strongly in the opinion that it's four-digit year dash two-digit month dash two-digit day in the chat. I tend to
It's
agree with
usually
you.
the one. It's usually the one we recommend as well.
Absolutely. Oh, we have a question. Would you still utilize a transfer list for reference purposes?
I can answer that, but I'm confused at what they mean by reference purposes. So is it for your own reference or for somebody else's? I don't know if we know the answer.
For tracking purposes, program reference.
Oh yeah,
So, mhm.
yeah. You would definitely want to keep the information for the transfer list. Yes.
Yeah, you would want to keep track of what you'd scanned and or sent out so that you know what you're supposed to have back.
Yep.
And also, I'd probably recommend that you have, if your intent is to destroy the paper and you do destroy the paper, that you document the destruction of the paper and establish that the electronic copy is your official copy, so that if there's any question, you're looking for something, you know that you don't have a paper copy of it anymore. It's strictly electronic.
Yeah, like we recommend for disposition of any records, you want to make sure that you have full documentation on it in case anybody ever questions anything later.
And that might be something to talk to the state agency services about too, because if it falls underneath an RDA,
Mm,
updating that with information about, if you made a switch to electronic as your official record, or you made the switch from paper to like created digitally and you're keeping it digitally, that's information that's important to that RDA. So then, when the time comes to appraise those records for what should be happening to them as they near the end of their retention period. That's useful for not only the agency to know, but the archivists here to know as they assist you.
yeah, one thing to mention is that if you're a state agency, the archives collects your permanent historical records. So making sure that all of the information that's related to those records is collected for when that happens is really important. The State Record Center is not involved in the scanned records process, correct? Correct. Jamie, do you have any thoughts further on that?
Yeah, so the State Records Center, they're not involved with any scanning of records. Um, we currently don't do any in-house scanning for state agencies, but I know that one of our fellow units, Digital Record Services, is going to be working with state agencies, especially with the transfer of electronic records that state agencies already have, because those like Sarah said, we do hold permanent records of state agencies, regardless of format. So that is something that you could talk to your state agency scheduling services about, and in all likelihood, they'll end up pulling state our digital record services into that conversation to help you figure out, you know, what's the best way to transfer it? What's the best way to format those records? So when they come to us, they're still accessible to you at the state agency and for staff at the archives and even possibly ultimately the public, although that would be like a whole nother discussion way down the road.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jamie.
Yep.
Lynn asks, does the recording of the webinar preserve the chat? It does not as part of the video that we do post. However, if that's something you need, please contact us. We're more than happy to help you out on that front. All right. Thanks for the great questions. Keep them coming. We've got another half hour and we are getting close to the end of our pre-prepared questions for you guys. So the question is, should I scan all of our records myself or should I hire someone to do it?
So I can take that.
Okay.
Um, it it kind of depends. I mean, you can go the do-it-yourself route, or you can hire out. It's really going to depend on what your need is and what your resources look like. So for a small project, like a couple of records boxes or a filing cabinet or two, it can be easily handled in-house by staff. Particularly, you just want to make sure that you talk to somebody before you start scanning about the imaging guidelines and making sure you're creating high quality images. If you're talking about a really large project, like all your personnel records for the last 40 or 50 years, you're not going to have the time, you're not going to have the staff, you're not going to have the equipment to devote to something like that. So going with an imaging vendor may be your best option. It's always important to remember that as of this recording, New York State has two preferred source vendors that government should consider for their imaging projects. There's the New York State Industries for the Disabled, or NYSID, and the New York State Preferred Source Program for New Yorkers Who Are Blind, or NYSPSP. Additionally, school districts can also work with BOCES for their imaging needs as well. The idea about, should I go with a vendor or should I not? It all depends on the size of the project and also what is your familiarity with scanning records, being able to maintain the digital images, feeling comfortable in creating high quality images with the formats and the preservation, the resolution that we discussed previously in the imaging guidelines. Whenever you're going to start a large project, I recommend, we all recommend reaching out to your records advisory officer or, your state agency RMO or people at the state archives. So you have an idea of what you need to do, not only to create the images, but to preserve them over the long term.
Okay, we had a request for links to NYSID and the preferred source program, so I'm pulling those right now and throwing those in the chat.
Sarah, can I add something about this?
Absolutely.
So, on another thing to consider, even if you could scan all your records, should you? Is there value in all of your records in making them digital, or is it going to create a cluttered space of even more records that you have to manage and make sure it can be accessible? Is the records that you're going to scan, is it only being accessed by one person very occasionally? And, it's got a 5-year retention, which isn't very, very long in the grand scheme of things. Or is it a set of records that multiple departments always need access to, and it's easier to have it somewhere where multiple people can search for it and grab what they need whenever they need it. Um, those are things to consider when you're deciding what records should be imaged versus maybe ones to hold off on versus maybe you don't want to worry about scanning those because paper works just fine. I don't think that in any world anytime soon, people will have every single bit of paper in their holdings scanned. I mean, certainly not the state archives.
Yeah, I know that the paperless office is aspirational for a lot of folks, but it takes a lot of thought and planning to go towards.
Oh, absolutely.
All right, let's see. We have a question from Jean. Does the agency have to have an electronic records model resolution before we submit for a New York State Archives grant?
I can answer that.
Mhm.
It is incredibly helpful to have electronic records model resolution just because people have the understanding at your local government level um, that the electronic copy can be the copy of record. And you want to make sure that that is clearly identified because that's really why we're doing these long-term high quality preservation copies to begin with. And then you can then look into applying for a grant if you're a local government for maintaining those, for scanning the images, and then you'll be able to address the issue of preservation and maintaining those images over the long term.
And I would say while it's not required for the grant, I think that it's a good demonstration that the local government recognizes that when they are moving to they're scanning records with the intention of making the electronic copy the official copy, that they understand that that resolution, you know, gives them the backing of their local government, that that is a new policy, and moving forward with either you do in-house or you do a scanning project with a grant, that the local government understands the responsibility of making that electronic copy an official record.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really important that's very clear to folks.
And I
We,
would add,
mhm.
because there's also the issue of fully understanding that if you are making the electronic copy of the copy of record and you're scanning things with a permanent retention, like maybe your vital records or so on, that you're taking on the responsibility of maintaining that record for its full retention period, which means you're going to have to deal with some kind of migration over time, whether it's moving it from one system to another or moving it from one format to another. So at some point, if you're talking about a permanent record, that is going to have to take place. So scanning an image means that you are going to have to move it to some other format over time. And you want to make sure that that information is going to be the same once it's gone through that migration as well. And that's something to think of over the long term.
Absolutely. That's honestly one of my biggest concerns when I'm talking to folks who are looking at digitizing their records is you really do have to, because they're going to be digitizing things that have 55-year retentions because they're doing payroll or long-term permanent personnel and student records, that you really have to think for that long term, that you have to make sure that they're available because it's not enough to simply have a copy of the record. You have to be able to access the information in it. And I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there who remember using WordPerfect and are having a lot of trouble accessing those files at this point. Or I think Jamie mentioned using a floppy disk for storage and having trouble getting access to the records on that. You know, it's really something that you have to stay on top of.
Try to find a PC or laptop that can read a CD player now, or read a CD now.
I know you have to buy add-ons for those. All right, let's see. Jacqueline's got a question. Could there be problems if you set a too high PPI? Jamie, this feels like it's right up your alley.
It's not a like it's not like a huge issue. Like it's not like you'll make the file unreadable. It's just that if it's unnecessarily high, um, you run the risk of first of all your storage going crazy because you're trying to store these super high storage high memory wow. I apologize. I apparently can't talk today. I'm losing it. You're starting to create these high memory files that you don't really necessarily need them to be that high. So you're starting to see like your storage get out of control or run out of storage. But it also might take you a while to open those files. I know when we've scanned things here out of necessity at like 1200 ppi, it takes a while for the computer to open it. So that's why we suggest that you use the digital imaging guidelines, because we do have suggestions of like what DPI, PPI you should be using for not only the types of records that you're scanning, but the size or the condition of it. That'll play a factor. That'll play into what resolution you're setting for your scanning projects.
Good deal. Um, so Holly asked, there's a sample resolution that can be used for local government. Now I'm like, so I threw in the chat a sample resolution for the electronic records adoption. However, if it's related to the PPI, I think Jamie just answered it.
Yeah. And
Let's,
we're throwing these acronyms around PPI and DPI. If people are not familiar or you need to talk to your vendor, That stands for dots per inch or pixels per inch.
Let's see. Elaine is asking that I mentioned BOCES as or Michael mentioned BOCES as a potential vendor, that she is a BOCES, and they're trying to figure out how to assist their districts. And do you know what BOCES offer services in this area? There are a couple. Elaine, I'm going to throw my email in the chat. I recommend you give me a holler after this, and we'll talk about what you guys are doing and what services I'm aware of, because every BOCES offers a slightly different set of services in the records management arena. All right. Oh, in the interim, we should answer questions. Linda is asking, are you saying birth and death records can be digitized? Will we still need the paper copy? Who wants to take that one?
I will take that one since I opened that can of worms. Basically, yes, they can be scanned. However, you have to have the Department of Health's permission. And basically what you're saying is you are not going to be making them available online for the public. You're doing it yourself to ensure that you can quickly find things. So you're not going to scan everything and then put it all on your website. You can do like an index, but you couldn't do put all the records online from the Department of Health, because technically they are not the records of the local government. They're the records of the New York State Department of Health. So when we have a grant project and they're asking to scan those vital records, we always make sure that they know that they have to get the permission from the Department of Health. We have to get their sign off.
Good deal. Jacqueline's looking for clarification as to what is unnecessarily high. She's been scanning photos that are 100 years old.
Well, you know what? It's honestly going to depend on. So I'm curious what resolution you've been scanning at. In most cases, so those 100-year-old photographs, those are likely permanent records of value. Depending on the size of those images, there is a scale. I We have some guidelines in the digital imaging guidelines about photographs. I was trying to pull them up quickly. I think, let's see, the minimum for materials where the longest side is 5.5 inches is 800 ppi. So I'm not sure, like I said, what size photographs you have, but in the guidelines, there is a specific section about digitizing photographic records. And it has information on our specifications for when you're scanning black and white photographs, color photographs, even negatives or glass plate photograph materials. So there's a lot of great information in there about resolution for particular sizes, using like what color bit you should be using or grayscale bit to be able to capture all the information you need while you're scanning.
And I would add, when we're talking about that 300 DPI, that's the minimum. That's the minimum to ensure that you can have the optical character recognition, OCR, that's going to allow for your keyword searches for your standard text documents.
And Jacqueline clarifies that she's been scanning at least 1200, some at 2400, and that she'll look at the guidelines. Lynn is asking, who do we ask at DOH for permission to scan the records? I don't have that information at my fingertips right this second. However, if you reach out to your records advisory officer, and I threw the link for their contact information up earlier, they'll be happy to get you that information. And that is the last of the questions we have for right now. We've got 15 more minutes, folks, so please feel free to keep throwing them in. In the interim, I'm going to pester my lovely panelists and ask them, what do you think is a sign that a project is being set up right, that it's going to be successful? Why don't we throw that at Michael first, because he's been working with a lot of governments on these lately.
So the one sign that it's going to be set up right is that you have your IT involved in some way, shape, or form, whether that's somebody who's on staff or a group that's on staff or maybe a vendor that comes in once a month, as long as they're involved in your project, that is incredibly important because they're going to understand what it takes to store the images and make sure that they're going to be maintained. You don't want to have a situation where you're scanning all of these images and you don't know where to put them, or you're not 100% sure of how you're going to access them. Because we have people who put applications together that focus entirely on the creation of the images, but not the long-term storage or even the short-term maintenance of those images. And having your IT involved is incredibly important. So when we see that, we know that the project is heading in the right direction, that they have an understanding that it's more than just scanning the images, but what to do with them afterwards.
Cool. Jamie, what are your thoughts?
I think for me, a sign of a successful project or one that will be is when you can tell that somebody has sat down and scoped out their project. And that means they've sat down, they've thought about what they wanted to scan, and they've asked themselves a lot of important questions of like, what records are we going to scan? Um, what resolution and format are we going to scan them in? Who's going to be doing the scanning? Who's going to be doing the image verification? Where are we putting these? Like asking all of those questions beforehand and getting a project plan together so they know what the project should look like from start to end, with the understanding that things happen along the way and it might require you to be a little bit flexible, but even just having that outline can really help you make sure that you're staying on track with your project and that you're not going to have any of these oh crap moments where you're like, we didn't even consider this at all.
Okay. Related to that, what do you guys think are the biggest red flags for imaging projects that, there's something here that needs to be looked at again?
The biggest red flag is somebody who wants to scan records with a very short retention period. Uh, Going back to that idea of scanning everything, sometimes people want to scan records with a retention period of 6 years or less. And unless they have an incredibly high, what we call retrieval rate, which is when people, how often they're requested and how often people need to use them, it doesn't make sense to scan records with such a short retention period because you're going to be getting rid of them fairly quickly. So you want to make sure that you are identifying records that have an incredibly high use and records ideally that are going to be around for longer than 6 years.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, I think it's a big red flag is not considering image verification and how you're going to make sure those records are accessible. And that includes like where they're going to be stored, but also how you're going to name those files. Because how you name a file can be very important for somebody else, for basically letting those records continue to be accessible and usable by staff members, not just yourself. So, I mean, you want to consider verifying those images, especially if you're switching over to making electronic your official copy, because there's no going back to the paper copy to make a new scan. Like that's it. And then with file naming, like I said, if it stays as image 001 and there's no sort of indexing or a file name to that record, well, who's going to be able to access that? You're just going to create a unnecessarily long retrieval time, probably the same amount of time it took you to retrieve the paper record. So those are my red flags.
I agree. I agree. Um, for me, one of them is folks wanting to move everything into the cloud, but not really thinking about what the implications of that are in terms of access and ongoing maintenance and costs associated with it. Oh, we have questions. So let's see. First question from Holly. Can maps be digitized?
They can, yeah. We even have a section in the digital imaging guidelines about scanning maps and plans, I believe the section is called. So we have guidelines for there. There are scanners out there that can accommodate maps, like the one we have here at the State Archives. I believe it's like the biggest width it can accommodate is 50 inches. So there's definitely scanners out there that you could purchase for in-house use, but then there's also vendors out there that have the type of scanning equipment that can accommodate the records, that are oversized like maps.
All right. Leanne is asking, how important is OCR if scans are properly labeled?
So I can take that. OCR is important because one of the reasons everybody's scanning things is they want to be able to do keyword searches, not just of the, the file name, but they want to be able to do a search throughout all the document. So for example, if you were doing minutes, it would be, the file would probably be named, minutes with the year and the date. Uh, that's great, but it would be certainly a lot better if you could be able to do keyword search of all of those minutes from that month, that you could finally drill down and be able to find the information of when that stoplight was first requested.
Thank you. Holly's asking, can court records be digitized?
I can take that.
Mhm.
Yes, they can, but you have to talk to the Office of Courts Administration because they're different than we are. Their records have a completely separate retention schedule. So you have to reach out to them. And usually when it comes to anything dealing with court records, you need their permission for it. So I highly recommend contacting the Office of Courts Administration to find out what their details are in terms of any kind of digitization project. I would assume their digital imaging guidelines is similar to ours because I know that the retention schedule that they have is similar to ours. But they tend to have, just in terms of retention, they tend to have much longer retention periods, and you can't get rid of anything without their permission.
And I'm throwing a link into to OCA's main page in the chat. All right, we have 8 minutes left. I'm going to head into my wrap-up slides, but please continue to throw questions in the chat and if you have them. Um, If you've got questions about any records management oriented projects, not just imaging, please don't hesitate to reach out to the State Archives. Whether you're looking to talk about your records retention and how to use the retention schedules or the need to develop retention schedules if you're a state agency. If you need any advice on how to do records management oriented projects, you're looking to start a scanning project, you're looking to inventory your records, you're looking to redo your records room because there are boxes everywhere. Somebody went out, managed to find every single printer box that is in the entirety of the Corning Tower and have stuffed them full of records and put them in a room in your offices. We can help you figure out the best way to start managing that and get around that. If you need any training, if there's a specific topic that you're interested in, we have a lot of records training recordings on our website already on a variety of topics. We offer at least one webinar a month on assorted records management topics. Next month's topic is going to be an introduction to audiovisual records. Please reach out to us, let us know what you need, and we're happy to try to provide it as best we can. The email address there will get you to our general mailbox, and from there it will get to the person it needs to talk to. But I linked in the chat prior to this the various state agency services and local government services email addresses. So if you know exactly who you need to talk to, just reach out to them directly.
Sarah, I wanted to note, it looks like there might be some questions in the Q&A as well as the chat.
Oh, They're in a different section. All right, let me see if I can find those. There is a Q&A. Oh, okay. I am sorry, Julie, I missed those. Do you have a template to establish a procedure handbook?
So I can answer that.
Okay.
If you're talking about just general records management procedures, yes, we do have a template. You can contact your records advisory officer and they'd be happy to share that. It's also on our website, but we can help you find exactly what you need in terms of that. In terms of procedures for imaging projects, other than the digital imaging guidelines, no, we don't. However, we do have a publication that's focused on what to do for your imaging and micrographics project, and that can help you. So it's not a procedure manual per se, but the publication gives you a lot of the do's and don'ts for what you need to do for your project.
And I am going to go grab that publication and throw that link in the chat for you folks. We have a question from Leanne, more OCR. The handwritten stuff, edits to manually filled in docs like disabled parking permits have been tough to recognize characters, especially new permit numbers written in Sharpies overlaying other typed text. Not much more information on on the forms for additional info. Any suggestions on how to handle that?
Neither one of us wanted to jump on that one. So when it comes to OCR, it is not infallible. Of course, we all know that you need to have somebody come through and ensure that the the suggestions it made for the indexing is correct. There is additional work that sometimes needs to be done in terms of any kind of indexing in OCR. However, there is improvement even with handwriting given AI and how it's tied to what's called intelligent character recognition, which has been steadily improving over the years. But yes, there are some limitations, and there are some things like I can think of things like onion skin paper and other issues where it may not be 100%, and you're going to have to do some additional editing. The question of, can some things ever go through OCR is something that is being answered on a daily basis as the programs and AI improves. Um, but we always give the caveat that whenever any kind of OCR, ICR is being done, that you make sure you double check what you can and ensure that the right information is actually being saved.
Yeah, and when all else fails, that's where your file naming and your file structure comes into play, where at the very least you know where those items are supposed to be and they're labeled appropriately. So then if OCR isn't allowing you to be able to successfully keyword search, you can still at least be able to get down to what you're looking for that way.
All right. So to close out, Jamie and Michael, do you have any words of wisdom or advice or one thought that you want folks to take away from today? Why don't we go with Michael first?
Okay. If you are thinking of a scanning project, digitization project, we always recommend that you contact your records advisory officer or your agency RMO to find out what records you have and to enter some kind of selection process to determine which records are the best ones for scanning.
Yeah, and I guess I would add to that, definitely contact the staff here at State Archives if you are thinking about doing scanning projects. I'm pretty sure that they like plan scanning projects in their sleep while they dream because they're so well versed in how to handle those things. And Scanning projects can feel really daunting and overwhelming just based on the size of the project. And just know that you're not alone. A lot of people feel the same way. Always talk to your other RMOs because they might have been in the same boat. And the staff here at the State Archives definitely has helped other local governments through it before too, and they can make sure that you are planning for a successful project.
All right, thank you. If you have any questions that we didn't get to today or you didn't want to throw in the chat but you would like answered, please reach out at one of the email addresses, rec management or the one directly to your advisory officer or state agency services person, and we will get to you as fast as we can. So thank you so much for spending time with us today. Really appreciate it, folks, and we hope to talk to you soon.